Welcome to The Core of It, a podcast we deliver from Core Project Advisory, where we discuss tools and approaches and insights to successful project delivery. I'm Amy Griffiths from Core Project Advisory. I'm a Senior Document Controller.
And I'm Sonya Hargreaves. I'm a Project Manager at Core Project Advisory.
Today we're going to discuss assets spread across geographical areas and project planning and management and how to deal with that.
Yes. Yeah. So we've delivered quite a few projects at Core Project Advisory with exactly that structure. So, it can be really challenging to start for some clients to sort of understand where to start, how to plan it, and
planning,
and how to manage, multiple crews as well across multiple assets, when you're sort of working from one geographical end to the other. So
different parts of Australia or international. Or,
yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest things is obviously having your areas, your site lists, and understanding, what you're doing at each site, because it could be different as well. So, you could be working through all sorts of stuff. Some could be a little bit more difficult than others.
Do you ever work with projects that are covering different geographical areas? Do you ever work with some projects that might be the one job specifically, but you've got brownfields and greenfields going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really can be quite challenging because you need to understand what you're doing across both, obviously. But if you're working in brownfield space, you might need to do isolations or shutdowns on equipment, which you need to pre-plan, obviously, and organise safety protocols, and all the information and documentation is key as well. You need to sort of have all that in place before you sort of go out there and plan all the jobs and all the work.
I feel that greenfields just sounds so much more easy.
Plug and play.
A preferred option, but I guess there's always going to be some kind of tie-in point at some stage too.
Yeah, I mean, not always, but generally there would be. It depends on the project as well.
Yeah. And how do you find, and is it two questions in one, is it across the board, or how do you find people manage and code what's what? Like, does brownfields have specific codes? Do greenfields have specific codes? Does it depend on the company? What's your experience?
Definitely depends on the company. Some clients we've worked for, they have their specific coding and that means something, and you do not mess with that.
Yeah.
It stays the same and that gets rolled out across all the assets, no matter where they are, greenfield, brownfield, dispersed. And then others might be kind of struggling to sort of separate or understand how they want to number not only their documents but maybe their assets as well, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. But definitely the documentation, it needs to mean something. You can't just sort of code it in any kind of manner. It does need to relate or correlate to some sort of location is always good, or something that might mean something in the company system if they have an asset-based structure already. It's always good to relate that way as well.
And would you say, obviously, we talk in general a lot about drawings and sketches and things, and they would have a document number, and every number on that document number would mean something or a specific area. Generally, you have the project number at the start or a project code, and then you'll have, you can split it up into areas of where you're working on the project or equipment types, and they can all come under the same thing. But you've also got the option to have quite a expansive metadata field too, where you can go into depth of what areas you want to list so that your document register can be searchable specifically for these areas, and then it would come back to your document control team filling out the metadata when they're uploading documentation.
Yeah, and it definitely makes handover activities a lot more beneficial and operationally, right? Because if you're handing over a whole bunch of information to operators or operational clients and they can't understand what you've given them, or the coding doesn't make sense, or, manuals, they can't find them, none of that's going to be very helpful. So you kind of need to put yourself in the shoes of the end user of the asset as well at the same time. And your contractor might not know that, but your client might. So sometimes you just need to kick off those conversations to make sure that whatever the decision is going to be, that whole process is followed through end to end.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's important on the setup meetings and project planning, where you could come to your kickoff meetings and discuss these kind of things that can come out down the path. So, you can be explaining that with metadata systems, like even pre-project setup, like literally talking the early days of project planning, if you get involved with your document control team or your database management team, and you can have your RFIs, NCRs, cost notices and managements and things, you can have all the metadata referencing the same areas, and you can make some of these fields mandatory so that if you're going to create an RFI on pipe work at Area 15, your RFI can relate to that, your NCR can relate to that.
Absolutely.
You can run reports specifically that relate to that, and you could have that as a mandatory field that needs to be filled out. So there's the pre-planning, I think, is key, and I find that there are a lot of projects that get down the path and we're getting through design, and then we think, that would have been really handy if we had have been involved in those earlier setup meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. And even commercially and contractually, if you're not relating all of that information and some of those decision-making items to an asset specifically or a location specifically, it can make it really difficult to understand, what was this in relation to again? I can't remember where I was. If you're managing a lot of assets across a really wide variety location, like area, and if that's not organised, then, you're spending time looking for things, and, it can be really tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think everybody's probably got a story from a job that they were on where they couldn't find something, or it contractually blew something out and got very expensive. There was a job that I was on, and a contracting company had come in and said, we never received that information. But with I think this day and age, with the way you can literally pinpoint, you can find that needle in the haystack with the right metadata. So, and
the right patience.
The right patience and the right type of auditing and the passion to be doing that kind of auditing. And I love auditing, and I love jumping in and really finding things as well. So my involvement in that role was to literally go in and pluck out what they hadn't received and pull up their signature that was on the documentation that they had received, and it avoided a really hefty lawsuit on the company that I was working for. So, however, that doesn't always go that way. Like, potentially it could have fallen over and it may have been misplaced, and then, you've got to follow the protocols of that. But I guess the ideal world would be to avoid those kind of situations. Yeah.
And the other part of it too is there's a huge safety aspect to managing dispersed asset project delivery as well. And, I know that in a lot of, cases we've had to make sure, obviously, that you've got all your documentation before you go out to site. It's all pre-planned. Everything is associated to the right asset, and everything's filled out, filed away. And if God forbid something was to happen, it's even minor, you need to be able to get your hands on that stuff pretty quickly. Yes. And if you can't, that can be a big problem. So, definitely from a safety perspective, it's super critical to be able to understand how you're going to file that information, where you're going to put it, and how you're going to relate it to those areas or the assets or the location. And, quality-wise, commissioning-wise, if you've got a really long pipeline and you're sending people, to all different areas for commissioning works, wet commissioning, they need to know, where am I going? Which form am I filling out? And like you say earlier about the metadata fields, what am I filling out? Like, where am I? So, and if they don't have those options, it makes it really hard for them to kind of complete that.
Exactly. And the project duration, like, there's not many projects that are large-scale projects that are 12 months, like projects can be 2, 3, 4, 10 years. So, we've got people coming and going. Yeah. They always blow out longer than what you think you'll be on there for. So, you've got to, I think you've got to be so transparent. There's got to be so much information. You've almost got to make it so, anybody could come and sit down and find something that they're looking for. There's a few, as a document controller, there's lots of stuff that you do that is painful, and it's such a long process, but you feel so good once it's all done and ticked off. And I've had a situation where I was just literally given a hard drive, 30,000 documents on it, find the latest of each of these documents, and documents were saved in multiple folders. There might have been 10 of the same revision just saved across multiple folders because it just got dumped and nobody looked after it previously. And it took me probably 3 months to go through and pull in the documents that we needed, but we got there. And if the company hadn't have employed document control as a team to get in there and set them up, then it would have been horrific for them to try and find all the information because it was brownfields and it was an upgrade. So, yeah, they've got to have that. Yeah. Luckily, it was in the one spot, but and I'd imagine that in different locations, and they will need everything.
Yeah. And it does happen. And, you know, like I say, I don't think there's ever been a project that I've been on that I haven't learnt something, you know, in some kind of form. And you're never going to get it right.
To another project too. Like now I know how to easily pull stuff out of files and create spreadsheets from that. Yeah, exactly. So,
and I think like when you're dealing with brownfield, it is really difficult. And if there is multiple locations where things can get held and there's not responsibility of who's managing or maintaining that, it can really lead to some really tricky conversations and questions where, you know, you need to validate that information and sometimes quickly.
Yeah.
If you've got time to work through it, then that's a luxury. But if you do need to get through it quickly, it can be pretty challenging and times that by, you know, 100 different areas or, you know, 1,000 assets, you know, and you could be really up against it. And when you're pulling information out and you don't know if it's accurate or not, you know, I always say to people, think about, you know, the person in the trench in the middle of the night when a pipe is broken or something is not working properly, and they're the ones that are really needing the jewelry. Yeah, exactly. They don't have the luxury of, you know, just bringing up on the computer or someone's hard drive or whatever.
Yeah.
So it is a challenge. And it's a challenge for a lot of businesses, and we try to help, you know, manage all of that and give good options and good best practice to manage that and, you know, even get better moving forwards because sometimes you need to sort of find a line in the sand and go, okay, well, we are where we are today. We've got our project coming up or whatever, and we have what we have, and then let's start to work through this documentation to make it better, as well as working through your upgrade or your project to be able to bring the new information in and then start looking at what's being replaced versus, no, these drawings actually need to stay in play because they're still valid and, you know, represent something that's, you know, still on site.
Yeah, and it's a bit of I mean, we talk a lot about client side, but also the smaller contractors coming into a job. Like they may be the first time they're working with that client, and the pre-planning is key. You don't have to be a big, huge stakeholder in the business to get these jobs in the first place and to keep them. But I have certainly seen contractors marched off site with minimal notice. So at the end of the day, everybody wants to do the right thing, to keep work, to gain future work. So, yeah, there's a lot of dynamics that can come into it, but the planning stages are so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I worked on a big project on an island off Australia. I won't name names, but it was a fantastic project to work on. It had a lot of its own difficulties. It was I can't be so specific. It was a nature reserve. People will probably start to flag where it might have been. But there was a lot of ins and outs to get that project going and to get it across the line and to continue it on. And it was managed on the mainland by a company. So there were elements of getting staff to and from site. There were elements of getting all the materials to and from the island and removing off, you know, waste and things like that. Being a nature reserve, like, it's just a huge, like, project world is huge what they can do. And we're only in Australia, you know, like imagine around the world, the different projects that are going on, like the planning stages are just crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like you can always learn different things on different projects as well because they're not always going to be the same type of project. So you need to sometimes flip the script a little bit to help deliver something that might be like a little bit out of the norm or a bit different. You know, pipeline delivery project is completely different to, you know, a high-rise delivery.
Yeah, exactly.
And that might, you know, whilst it's not so geographically across areas, you know, it's still challenging in terms of, you know, the height and keeping track of all the levels and, you know, making sure what area is up to what sort of stage in the fit out as well. So there's lots of different dynamics to track.
Yeah, exactly. You could be working on gas plants, you could be working in refineries, you could, across the board. There's just so many different projects, and that also means that if you come off one specific role and into something completely different, all of your numbers are going to be different. All of your area codes are going to be different. So, it's continuously learning these new S24 means this on this project, and S24 actually means this on a different project. I think I came on one of our jobs and there was an acronym, and I'd always had it meant something else, and you were like, oh no, that means this, and I was like, it took me so long to just be like, oh my gosh, it's not, it was an actual document, whereas it was an area on a different project. But
sometimes you need a
wrapping your head
well of what's the acronyms on the project.
Acronyms for days.
Definitely. And I think too, like one of the biggest challenges that I've worked with a lot, especially in the last probably 6 to 8 years of my working life, is the changes in dynamics when you're dealing with operational brownfield dispersed assets as well. You're trying to do what you need to do in an area where it's an operational asset. So you've got to really maintain that communication and make sure the documentation is up to date and it's all running smoothly, because at the end of the day, your project might move on to the next location, but if everything isn't left behind, in a good state, or returns as is, so to speak, that can cause some really big challenges for operations to be able to do their normal day-to-day working as they would.
And with brownfields, a lot of the time you are dealing with an operational asset that is, or there's staff that work and run it, and that have nothing to do with the project that you're doing. So you've got to be very careful not to cross over and cause any a slowdown of their general day-to-day running of their asset as well. How do you feel, or how do you find, or what is your experience, I guess, with managing risk in the planning stage?
Great question. I think you've really got to be mindful of, obviously, safety, quality components, how you're going to sort of navigate and structure all your documentation and communication. Who are the key people as well in the project? So many times things have sort of gone a bit haywire because, the person's not gone to the right person for sign-off or, certain approvals. So you've got to have a really tight project team to keep all those risk elements, I guess, not becoming a risk, right? You're always going to have something, but you need to sort of mitigate it as best as possible where you can, and then, make changes where necessary to sort of help deliver it, appropriately.
What sort of time frame do you think a lot of the bigger projects would have on the planning and the risk management stages?
Oh, how long's a piece of string? I mean, it really depends. A lot of projects have a huge amount of pre-concept. What do we want to do here, let alone let's start designing. So it does really 100% depend on what the project is and what they're kind of wanting out of it. And as well, some projects that are, at local government level or local council level, and, they need to also get the funding to sort of move forward. So there can be a whole lot of steps involved up front that come with a whole bunch of red tape. So
yeah. And then there's also the ones where they do all the planning and then it just doesn't go ahead. It's like, but we're not going to carry on with it.
And that absolutely happens. And, that's unfortunately just the way that projects go sometimes.
Yeah. And then you also get the projects that they're planning, obviously, for their project that they're doing, but they're also future planning because they know that there may be another upgrade in the 10 years' time or whatever. So, yeah.
And that's the thing, like that's what, really good planners can do. They can definitely see the future or work to, certain budgets or plan accordingly as per direction. But, it really depends on so many factors,
Yeah. Well, that gives us a good rundown, I think, on project planning, and hopefully people can have learned something today that's going to help for future proofing.
Yeah, absolutely. And planning that dispersed asset and multiple location dynamic is always lots of fun. So, so thanks for joining us at the core of it at Core Project Advisory. Tune into the next episode.
Thanks. Bye.